We've come to chapter 39 of the Book of Ezekiel, and in this chapter God, through the prophet Ezekiel, covers a lot of the same things that we have read in the previous chapter. So this is basically continuation of the prophecy of Gog and Magog. Verse 1, "And you, son of man, prophesy against Gog and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. And I'll turn you around and lead you on, bringing you up from the far north, and bring you against the mountains of Israel." Now with verse 2, there is an issue in the Old King James Version in the Bible, brethren. And the issue is this. The Old King James Version rendering of this verse says, "And I'll turn thee back and leave but the sixth part of thee, and will cause thee to come up from the north parts, and will bring thee upon the mountains of Israel." You see, one part of that is not really accurately translated in the phrase, "leave but the sixth part of thee." The word really means lead and not the sixth part. It means I'll lead you on back and lead you away. It does not say I'll leave the sixth part in you. The original Hebrew word shasha means annihilate, or it can be used as a word for lead, and has nothing to do with the word six in Hebrew, which is shesh, not shasha but shesh. So the translators in the Old King James have confused the two words, and thus they rendered wrong translation. So Ezekiel is not prophesying that only a sixth of the Asiatic horse will be left there at all, but he says, I'm going to turn you back and lead you away and cause you to come up from the northern parts and bring you upon the mountains of Israel. So apparently, because they are still rebellious at the end of the millennium, God let Satan bring them down there. It says that God was doing it. Verse 3, "Then I'll knock the bow out of your left hand and cause the arrows to fall out of your right hand. You shall fall upon the mountains of Israel, you and all your troops, and the peoples who are with you. I'll give you to birds of prey of every sort, and to the beasts of the field to be devoured." So here again it shows that when God deals with them, it is, brethren, extinction. It is death. And their carcasses will be devoured by the wild animals. Verse 5, "You shall fall on the open field, for I have spoken, says the Lord God. And I'll send fire on Magog and on those who live in security in the coastlands. Then they shall know that I am the Lord." So you see, apparently the only language that they are going to understand is a supernatural word from God. And then they realize He is God. And then He is known by them and yet not known by all. Some of them are still going to be rebellious at the millennium. So in the next verse, God is going to make His name known by what He will do to these Asiatic rebels. Verse 7, "So I'll make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, and I'll not let them profane my holy name anymore. Then the nations shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One of Israel." So you see, when the nations see this God of war intervene supernaturally and put a halt to these warring hordes of Asia, even at the beginning of the millennium, or even after the millennium, they shall know that He is God. Verse 8, "Surely it is coming, and it shall be done, says the Lord God. This is the day of which I have spoken. Then those who dwell in the cities of Israel will go out and set on fire and burn the weapons, both the shields and bucklers, the bows and arrows, the javelins and spears, and they will make fires with them for 7 years. So here we have man's number 6 again, They're going to burn all those 6 things with fires for 7 years. Verse 10, "They will not take wood from the field, nor cut down any from the forests, because they'll make fires with the weapons, and they will plunder those who plunder them and pillage those who pillage them, says the Lord God." So no more weapon making, you see. And when these weapons are burned and consumed, then these rebellious Asiatics that don't want to believe in God are going to be forced to recognize and admit God, so they will take no wood from the field, nor cut down any from the forest to make instruments for war. Verse 11, "It will come to pass in that day that I will give Gog a burial place there in Israel, the valley of those who pass by east of the sea, and it will obstruct travelers, because there they will bury Gog and all his multitude. Therefore, they will call it the valley of Hamon Gog. Now you see, this will be a burial place in Israel. Here again, the word for burial place is actually not Sheol, but sepulchres. So it's not like hell, It's sepulchres, and the depth of the valley is being obstructive, as we see in the New King James Version. It will be hindering passages going by. Now this Hamon Gog that we read in verse 11 actually means the multitude of Gog. The multitude of Gog. Verse 12. For 7 months the house of Israel will be burying them in order to cleanse the land. Indeed, all the people of the land will be burying, and then will gain renown for it on the day that I am glorified, says the Lord God. They will set apart men regularly employed with the help of a search party to pass through the land and bury those bodies remaining on the ground in order to cleanse it. At the end of 7 months they will make a search. The search party will pass through the land, and when anyone sees a man's bone, he shall set up a marker by it till the buriers have buried it in the valley of Hamon Gog. The name of the city will also be Hamonach. Thus they shall cleanse the land. Now the word Hamonach in verse 16 just means to the multitude. Verse 17. And as for you, son of man, thus says the Lord God, speak to every sort of bird and to every beast of the field. Assemble yourselves and come. Gather together from all sides to my sacrificial meal, which I am sacrificing for you, a great sacrificial meal on the mountains of Israel, that you may eat flesh and drink blood. Now, this is so that the wild animals would devour any of those carcasses that are not buried. Verse 18. You shall eat the flesh of the mighty, drink the blood of the princes of the earth, of rams and lambs, of goats and bulls, all of them fatlings of Bashan. You shall eat fat till you are full, and drink blood till you are drunk, at my sacrificial meal, which I am sacrificing for you. So we see from verse 19 and 18 that, God is going to make a sacrifice of these rebellious powers that try to prevent God's millennium from working out. Verse 20. You shall be filled at my table with horses and riders, with mighty men and with all men of war, says the Lord God. I'll set my glory among the nations. All the nations shall see my judgment which I have executed, and my hand which I have laid on them. So the house of Israel shall know that I am the Lord their God from that day forward. The Gentiles shall know that the house of Israel went into captivity for their iniquity, because they were unfaithful to me. Therefore I hid my face from them. I gave them into the hands of their enemies, and they all fell by the sword. So you see, the non-Israelites will understand that the house of Israel were in captivity because of their sins, their misrepresentation of the true Christianity, because of their corruption, degeneracy, and rebellion. Verse 24, according to their uncleanness and according to their transgressions, I have dealt with them and hidden my face from them. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, now I'll bring back the captives of Jacob and have mercy on the whole house of Israel, and I'll be jealous for my holy name. After they have borne their shame and all their unfaithfulness in which they were unfaithful to me, when they dwelt safely in their own land and no one made them afraid, when I have brought them back from the peoples and gathered them out of their enemies' lands, and I am hallowed in them in the sight of many nations, then they shall know that I am the Lord their God, who sent them into captivity among the nations, but also brought them back to their land and left none of them captive any longer. And I will not hide my face from them any more, for I shall have poured out my spirit on the house of Israel, says the Lord God. In other words, they're now, converted, they're being saved, brethren, and we can see by the comments in chapter 38 that the setting has to be millennial. It cannot be talking about the 7th trumpet. It cannot be talking about the 6th trumpet or the 5th trumpet. It is talking about after Israel has been regathered and they are dwelling in unwalled cities, they are at rest safely, and there is no fear. And yet, you see, some of these Asiatic and African groups described come up rebelliously, and God has to show his godship by dealing with them and punishing them, and a lot of them will be just consumed and buried. Now, some of them are, rebellious all the way through the millennium. And then they go with Satan in the battle against the capital of the saints at the end of the millennium. And then God just wipes them out and they have to be buried. But it can apply, brethren, to any time even before the millennium. So this can be describing a situation at the beginning of the millennium and then at the end of the millennium as well, when we understand that all of the prophecies of the Church of God Seventh Day just went out of the window because they have never understood any of that. And not only them, of course, but no other church of the face of the earth does understand that, but the Church of God.